check
There we go.
out.
Hello.
Yeah, there's another one up there as well.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Hello, welcome to the workshop. It's Wednesday again. Woohoo!
Woo! Yeah,
So
particles.
good to be
Woo!
back again.
Oh, what happened to the camera? Who deleted it? Someone deleted the camera. Hi, we're back.
I blame Chroma
Oh my gosh.
because he just left the world like the moment the camera broke.
Oh, yep. Then that makes sense. Do you need me to redo something? Because you're not seeing, you guys aren't seeing yourself.
No,
That's fine.
It's alright.
Oh, you guys can
we
hear
can
my
your
AC. Oh, here, let me walk over there. It's gonna get extra loud right now when I walk over there.
People are still
There we go.
popping in.
Yeah, we're letting them
So,
file in.
Yep,
There we go.
Kush Lord. Oh, a new viewer, and we've got
ELG Icefish.
ELG Icefish. Yep, new viewer as well. Welcome.
Oh, hi. Yes, I will also be muting my microphone while they are educating you guys on all of the wonderful world of particles. Yep.
So yeah, Workshop Wednesdays. Oh, by the way, something that I have finally sorted out is the YouTube channel. We now actually have a playlist for the Workshop Wednesdays now. There are a few videos missing. Unfortunately, we can't recover those, which is a bit of a, bad thing. But hopefully, we can maybe recover those and do new videos.
yeah.
But that's something we'd probably do off stream.
Definitely. Well,
So today they're doing some more cool bits and pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Today we're going to be covering particles.
Hey, Ryuvi.
indeed.
Yes?
Pat, 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 pat.
well,
Exactly.
that's some particle effects right there.
Yes.
Nice fire effects.
Yep.
Toasted.
Yep, we're making the Large Hadron Collider. Yep. Making particles, well, that would be particle smashing,
Hadron?
but
Large Hadron Collider. I could have sworn I had a model of it somewhere. I'll find that later. Actually,
okay.
it's in Neos
Well,
universe.
it looks like we got quite a few people here watching, so why don't we get the show on the road?
Alrighty.
I'll mute
So-
Yep.
myself.
Prior
Yep,
to the
I'll
stream,
let you guys get on with your work.
okay.
Let's head on over and we can talk about it while we're over here.
Yeah, prior to the stream, I've brought in quite a few examples, same with Ryuvi as well, and also some things that are familiar of the previous stream as well. Previous stream was about like how to make, a simple functioning weapon in Neos. And with those weapons, they also utilize particles when using them. Say as I shoot it, you'll see there's particles emitting from the gun's muzzle, like a muzzle flash effect. And whenever an object gets hit by the particle. Actually, another example here
Yeah.
is whenever you eject some shells out of this weapon right there, it actually uses particles. Hold
Oh.
on, it didn't appear for me.
Oh.
There we go. Actually, just set this over there. And all, except for this one, I'm still working on this one, but these three weapons are now within the Neos Essentials as well as examples for people to play around with.
That's nice.
Let's see here. There we go.
Yep, there they go.
Yeah, that's actually particles.
Mm-hmm. So particles are quite versatile here in Neos. You can make a wide range of things using, you can change the speed of them, you can change how they behave, whether they have gravity, and all sorts of various things. You can even give them a mesh, as we'll see up ahead.
Mm-hmm.
So the first examples we have here is this neat fire effect. I think this is using a bit more than particles, but the basis is, you got a little fire ring. Let's actually take a look at that. It's spin.
Yes, spin. The particle effect itself is spinning, not the particle trails itself, but you can actually get some neat effects by moving the particle system itself. In this case right here, kind of making it seem like all the particles are going into one space. Actually, if I go up here, there we go. This must be the object. Yep, there it is.
Spin.
And an object it's attached to.
So particles could be used in conjunction with things like this to make, because particles, with particle systems, I should say, in Neos, you can do quite a lot, but of course there's some things that you can't do, like something like this. So when you use it in conjunction with slots and other things, other methods that Neos provides to move things and such, then you can create some really interesting effects.
This next example is one I set up previously yesterday by using a procedural mesh. Now, one of the things you can do with particles is actually use 3D models as a particle. Not only like a 3D model that you can import, but also procedural meshes. Now, I don't know if it's tracking. I don't know if it's showing up in the screen or so, but you can see there's a slight wobble to the bubbles. And that's actually because the procedural mesh is changing a little bit using components, giving that little wobble. So if I go into the components here, kind of scroll all the way down here, you'll see the capsule mesh here. There's like a number moving back and forth. The reason why that is, you got a wobbler here.
It's wobbling just a little bit.
Yep, giving that little bubbly look.
This also is an example that you can have mesh particles too, that don't just have to be sprites or textures.
Oh, you can even see the preview wobble a little bit too. Here's another good example I had previously too, by using the refract.
Is this where Fruix gets his power? Maybe.
Yes. Especially with the bubbles. Now, this one right here is just another really good example of like how you can use different materials for particles as well. Right now it's using a refract material to make this like heat wave effect coming from this thruster. Now if I put my hand behind it, or as Raivi goes behind it, there's that wavy effect.
All distorted.
Yep. Using the refract shader. Scroll all the way down, it should be right here.
Yep, we have a specific refraction material, which is applied to, it looks like a mesh, and then we set the mesh as the particle mesh, and it looks like this. We also have just a neat effect here, I guess, to make this look like a thruster.
Yes, those are just, it's actually a material with a texture scrolling and a distortion texture on it.
We actually have an interesting question before we move on. How's the performance of particles with components? Should you be careful about making too many of them? And yes, but there's a few things to consider in regards to that, is particle count and particle size. If you have a lot of really big particles that are, say, to alpha blend mode, it'll really drop your performance. So usually it's best to, as they say, less is more. So the less particles that you can put in to keep the same kind of performance, while the same visual effect that you're looking for is best. What do we have going on here?
This next one is going to be familiar to a lot of folks who watch our streams. It's just something I figured I'd bring in. It's simply a huge amount of particles, but they're all spinning. In fact, you can also rotate each individual objects like this. Yes.
Oh yeah, you can give particles angular velocity, which means they rotate a specific amount.
Yep. And speaking of rotation too, this God ray effect right here, if I grab this box, the particles obey the rotation of the box there.
That's neat, actually.
Could come in handy for spotlights or even something like this too, where you have like a light going behind like windows and all that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Now these two next examples are made by Ryuvi, and they showcase a lot of the really cool stuff that you can do with particles. Right here, for example, you see like really good particle trails you can do, as well as collision where they can bounce off, as well as
they have lights
on it as well, on each individual particle. And I'm assuming, yep, as well as over here too, with the source.
I should note that this is I think 3 total particle systems. We've got the sparks, the smoke, and the sparks at the start, and these 3 things combined give you a whole system like this.
Mm-hmm. Combining multiple particle systems is also another way to get like really good effects.
Mm-hmm.
And this next one is one of my favorites too, of the steam plume effect, where it's actually using a sprite sheet to make it look like it's almost volumetric.
Mm-hmm. Which we will get into sprite sheets later.
Yes.
This is actually 2 particle systems. We've got the smoke, which is animating as it goes along, and we've got the little, I guess those are little water drops that are getting spewed out too. Like this is superheated
steam.
Water. Yeah.
And as you can see here, I can just bring out the texture that's used in the particle here, and it's a sprite sheet.
Yeah, this is an example of a sprite sheet where it will animate along each of these frames for the lifetime of the particle. That makes it look really nice.
It's a callback to the stream that we did with textures.
Yeah.
And these two are also kind of more abstract examples of particles or particle-like effects. This one right here having like a animated sprite sheet on a trail, going all these different little cool symbols going around. The lines themselves is actually procedural mesh. But yeah, combining all these different effects, you can make something pretty cool. And like the lens flare effect too adds to it. And right here,
this here
this
is
a, really
a
good
point
one.
cluster mesh. This is a point cluster mesh with a bunch of components on it to make it move and shift things a little bit, give it some motion, give it some life. And this is something that I really like. I actually only recently got into point cluster meshes, and this is a great example of what you can do.
Now kind of returning back to the, or do you want to add on to that, or?
No, we can get back to that later. What do we got next?
Yes. So another thing about going back to sprite sheets, there's a website that Ryuvi and I found that you can create like quite the interesting sprite sheets, or even just static particle textures, or even just animated textures in general. Now I can probably type it into the links within the YouTube once it's uploaded there, as well as in the world as well here. But it's like a GitHub project that someone has made too, where you can change different parameters and have it animated and different export settings and such. Like I even exported this fire texture right here. You can see the sprite sheet behind it. It's really good quality too.
You can render out these sprites at different resolutions, so you can have real low resolution if you need it, or you can get really high detailed and such if you want that as well.
Yes.
It's a really great GitHub project.
Yes. Some of the textures have already been used in things like Sojourner Island, or even in some of those weapons as well.
Actually, Sojourner Island is a great way to look at some more examples of particle effects, because we've got all sorts of effects there, like the fire, the water, and
sand
et
on the
cetera.
vehicles. Specifically, I mean like 2 particle effects for the vehicles. One where you can, when you're driving on the sand, it'll spew out like sand, and then when you're on the water, you'll have like an animated water sprite on it. Now,
Seeker says, that's a great looking 90s Game Torch particle. Yeah. So next, I think something that would be good, Aegis, is we can go over how to, make a particle system in Aeneas. We've shown all these examples, and
Yes.
there are a couple of ways that you can make a particle system here, and that's using the dev tip. Well, okay, both ways are using the dev tip. One is its new menu, and one is just straight from components, which we can show you both here.
Mhm.
So, I suppose I can start.
Easiest is through the new menu.
So once you can get yourself a dev tip, and opening your context menu, if you go to the create new menu, right away at the very bottom, you'll see particle system. Clicking this will get you started with the basics that you need for creating particles. You can see it already sets you up with a basic texture and all of the components that you might need for creating a particle system, which there are 3 major components. We have the particle system component, the particle style component, and some kind of emitter, in this case, a sphere emitter. If you want instead to make these manually yourself, on the component browser here, on whatever slot you want to attach it to, you can find these components under, let's see... Rendering particle system. Here you'll find particle style and particle system, and under emitters, you will find the various types of emitters that are available to you for particle systems. In this case, we're using a sphere emitter, as we can see. Now, there are a lot of settings when it comes to particles, and it may look overwhelming, but they all do something different. Starting from the top here, for the particle system, you can define a max number of particles that you want this particle system to have. So, we have it limited to 1,000 here, so if you just start spamming particles, no more than 1,000 will render at any time. It's a great way to keep the particle count down if you're worried about performance. This is also where you can adjust the simulation space. If we set it, for instance, to, I believe, parent space, and we want to move these particles around, once I select it, you'll see the particles. Let's try. So it's one of these spaces.
It's when it's
there
local.
We go. Local space. Now you'll see when I move the slot that the particles are coming from, the particles move with it.
It moves relative to the object it's parented under. And if you make a parent object, and if you set it to parent space, it'll move relative to that.
But if you use global space, then the particles just emit. You can see how they behave differently from local or parent space in that regard. Useful for things like, I have made a couple of weapons in the past and such where I want a particle effect to be attached to, say, the blade of a sword. Having it set to local means that it moves with the sword instead of dragging behind. It's a great use. Going down a little further, we have our particle style component, which is where most of all the styling comes for the particles. And up top, we have our motion vector mode, which this is for motion blur, I believe.
Yes.
But of course, in VR, when you're in VR, you don't have motion blur. This only really applies to cameras and desktop mode. But this changes how that motion blur behaves. Underneath these, we have the min and max start lifetime, start size, start speed, start rotation, and start angular velocity. And each of these is lifetime is how long each particle lasts. Right now, each one of them lasts 5 seconds. So when the particle system creates a particle, it will fly off for 5 seconds, and then after 5 seconds, it disappears. If we want to decrease that, I can just change both these to, say, 1, and now they will disappear much more quickly after 1 second. Usually for small particle effects, I have these at usually much less than a second. You can see now they disappear very quickly when I set it to 0.2 of a second. Now the reason there is a min and max here is this gives you a little bit of randomness to deal with. Like we can set one to 0.2 and set the other to 2 seconds. And now some of them last very short amount of time, and others last a very long amount of time. It can give your particles a bit of randomness. And that's why all of these settings, by the way, have min and max, is to add a little bit of randomness and I guess chaos to your particles, make it look a little bit more real if that's what you're going for. Now the next option here is start size, and as it explains here in the wording, it changes your start size. If I make it bigger, the particles get really big. But you'll see, just like before, the min start size and the max start size are different, so it picks a number between those two. Yes, there you go. Now it's correct. That's also a great demonstration. The max size doesn't have to be bigger than the min size. Other works. But those particles are a little large, so let's return that back down a little bit.
You still got that variation of size still. There you go.
A little bit less. Speed is how fast they move in whatever direction they're emitted from. So if we set this to a small value, like so, they move very slowly. Now it's a more self-contained particle. Whereas, say you're making a laser or maybe even a bullet as a particle, you can set the speed to really high and wow, you're going now. But that's a little fast for our needs, so let's reduce this down. Now, start rotation and angular velocity are a little bit tricky to see on a particle like this. Aegis, would you happen to have a particle that we could show rotation on?
Rotation?
Something that just blob. But rotation. So the particle is rendered as a sprite that faces your camera. No matter which way you look at it, it always looks like the particles. And rotation will rotate these. Give a bit more rotation to them.
I'll get a texture so we can apply onto there.
Okay.
Because that's just like a completely round texture, so let me find something that be easy to tell. Shapes, that's actually perfect.
That actually brings up something interesting. One particle example most people in Neos have seen is the MTC teleporter. That actually has a couple of particle systems on it. So that's another place you can look and dissect particles. So what we just did is just brought out this texture, and when you make a particle system using the Create New menu like we did, it also gives it a nice unlit material. We just applied this as the texture. Since it's got a black background, we set it to additive so that it only renders the white part. And now we have this slanted kind of particle.
Yes, another note too, it also generates the texture here too. So if you're not using this texture, I suggest just deleting it if we aren't using it. So, because some people end up leaving it in there, and it's pretty much just a unused asset. So,
okay. Well, now we have an asymmetric slanted particle. We go up here and demonstrate rotation. If I set the max start rotation to, say, 360, which this is in degrees, by the way, now every particle that comes out has a different rotation to it. That's cool. It makes it a lot more random. Angular velocity, quite similarly to rotation, allows you to control how much it will rotate or spin. If I set this also to, I don't know, 45? Now you see they spin, but not all at the same speed.
45.
Oh, that's 450. Let's not spin that fast. There we go. Now we have spinning particles that are at a random rotation. It makes it a whole lot more random than just the static slanted particles we had previously. This is a great way to add some randomness.
Positive numbers will go clockwise, negative numbers will go counterclockwise.
Now, under here, we have the checkbox for using 3D rotation. And this enables these four things here, which is the min and max start rotation and angular velocity for all three axes separately, which is just exactly like these. Instead, you have three pairs. This allows you to have the particles, instead of just facing you all the time and rotating on that axis, they'll rotate at any arbitrary angle you define in 3D space, exactly like this particle system. If you look really closely, actually, at these particles, if this shows up on stream, you'll see they're rotating like planes in 3D space. And that's what the use 3D rotation does in this regard.
And how to destroy the bitrate of the stream.
Yes.
Sorry.
That's fine. Now, the next one is actually really cool, and it's gravity strength. If we turn this up to about 9.8, ooh, that's a little fast, but you'll see the particles are going down with gravity. Let's set that to like 0.1. They fall.
Put a negative number on it.
So positive numbers go downwards with gravity, negative numbers go up. And now it's almost
That's
like
I can
white
make
embers.
Smoke or embers like that.
Smoke, fire, all sorts of things you can make using gravity. Let's set this to something a little less. I want to give them a little bit of motion, but not too much. Yeah. Okay. So underneath this, we have your minimum and maximum start color. This will pick a color between the two that you pick, and like these, pick a color between them, and it'll give you a random start color. Let's say red and blue. Oh, pick a nice start color anywhere between red and blue. And that's looking kind of neat, actually. You could also do, say, orange and blue. You can see some green and yellow in there too. I have a question here. So gravity in particles is the opposite of avatars, set using the set character gravity node, for example. Yes, it is I would treat it as a multiplier. It takes gravity, and a positive number, is downward because gravity, it takes your gravity, which is negative 9.81 meters per second, and if you do that at 1, then that's full gravity. Multiply by negative 1, well, that's the opposite of gravity. So yes, in a way, in short, it's opposite. There we go. Use color over lifetime is specific to... I think that matters with these, I'm not entirely sure. Because there are some parts of particle systems like alpha over lifetime and color over lifetime here that you'll see says arrays currently not supported. Once we get support for curve editing and array editing, then we'll be able to do things like control the alpha of the particle over time non-linearly, same with the color. Right now, that is a feature that is not implemented. However, that doesn't limit you too much in terms of the particles you can create if you get a little creative. Collisions is collisions. If I put my wing here, you'll see they collide with it. They bounce off. The reason these particles bounce is because we have the bounce field set to 0.9, which a segue into bounce is it's how much it bounces. We set this to 2, then these particles really bounce off relative to their input velocity. This is great for sparks. Like if you have a spark, go down and maybe bounce a few times on the ground.
Right here.
Exactly. Yeah, these particles have a little bit of boost to them, so they go boing. They bounce up once they hit a kind of a surface. Similarly, if we set this to a very low number or 0, they don't bounce at all.
You just get caught.
Yeah. Slightly sticky in that regards, actually.
Looks like we're like pushing them around.
Which that's something you can do even. Lifetime loss, I believe. It's one setting I haven't messed too much with, but I believe over time it will reduce their lifetime. Oh, actually, yes. When this makes it so when a particle collides with something, it reduces how long they live. So if you have something that lives for 1 second, when it collides with something, it'll live less than that. Lifetime loss of 1 means as soon as it hits, it just disappears.
So if you have a particle that lasts for a second, it goes down, say, or 2 seconds, takes 1 second to go down, hits the ground, that means it takes off half of its current lifetime, so that means it'll be less.
Yes.
So
set that at 0.
A quarter of what it is.
Now underneath here we have 3 inputs for material, trail material, and mesh. You'll see here we have the unlit material, which is this material, which is what the particle renders as. if we give a material a trail, which we get to down below, that will be the material for the trail. And mesh will let you, like what we did with the bubbles over there, plug in any sort of a mesh you want, and it will apply that to each of the particles with the settings, you know, its start size, speed, its rotation, etc. Alignment controls how the particles render relative to you. Facing means they always face you, regardless of how you're looking. Velocity means they orient themselves based on the velocity of the particle, which that's actually kind of interesting. You'll see as they go up, they face, you know, that direction, and as they're moving around, they face whatever different direction based on their velocity. This works well with models. Like, I could imagine if you wanted to do like a bolt as a particle system, you could have it aligned based on velocity, and great, there you go. View velocity is based on your view. It's a little hard to see, but it aligns to your view plane, not necessarily looking at you. This is great if you have, say, a mesh that refracts, because it works best when it's looking, when it's aligned with your view plane versus looking at you. But this is something you'll have to see for yourself, I believe. I don't know how well it shows up on stream.
Yeah, it's pretty much like something you have to mess around with.
World aligns them with the world. As you can see here, they've aligned themselves nicely with, I believe this is the z-axis. And they're flat towards that axis, always. And local aligns them to the object's local axis. So if you rotate it, it rotates the particle system accordingly. Which, is that what I believe that's what this particle is doing, is it's aligning them to the local orientation of the cube.
Yep.
Okay. But let's just set that back to facing, because most of the particles that I use, for example, use facing, but of course all of these other alignments have their various use cases. Now, underneath here we have length scale, and velocity scale. Length scale adjusts how long these particles are stretched, just overall.
Whoa.
A length scale of 1 means they're just normally rendered, smaller means they're squished, and greater numbers means they're stretched. You can get some
That
very
looks
weird
strange.
effects using this.
It's like...
Yeah, it's like it goes, whoa. It's kind of neat. Set this back to 1. 1.5, that's kind of a neat effect. Okay. And velocity scale, similarly, will adjust the length of these particles based on their velocity. So if they're moving really quickly, they'll get stretched out more. And if they're moving slowly, they'll get squished more. This is good if you have different... If the velocity of your particle changes based on gravity strength, or if it hits something, etc. Now here is minimum particle size and maximum particle size. If we set the minimum particle size to anything other than 0, then no matter how far away you go from the particle system, they will retain that same size. Similarly, if we have a maximum particle size, then the particles, even if you get close to them, will always be the same size in your field of view. Let's set that a little bit smaller so we can see this. So you can see as I get close, they don't get any bigger.
I haven't seen that been used.
It's not used very
that
often,
often.
but it would
That's the
probably really
thing.
help. Yeah. So what I mentioned earlier is, in terms of particle performance, is if you have a lot of particles that have alpha on them and they take up a large chunk of your screen, it will lower your performance because of how the rendering of alpha works and etc. However, setting a max particle size to something lower would probably help with that, because it would keep the particles a set size on your screen, keeping performance decent. Something I'll have to try. I haven't really touched that much. Now these are the general settings for the particle itself. Excuse me. Next up is a neat thing that particles can do that we've already alluded to, is trails. So to preface this, I'm going to set the length to 1, And I'm going to make these particles much smaller.
Make a particle trail
Like
material.
so. Yes. So actually, we already have a nice unlit material here, Aegis, and this is a neat thing that you can do with components. See this little D here next to the component header? You can click that, and that will duplicate the component and give you another one. So let's go ahead and apply this to this new material. And let's place this up under trail material. Now, in doing so, you'll see nothing happens because we have trails set to none. If we instead choose per particle, ooh, look, they now have trails. And you'll notice the trail is colored according to the color of the particle. Trail ratio allows you to change how many of the particles are emitted, have a trail based on the ratio. If it's 0.5, for example, then half of the particles that are emitted will have a trail.
There's
Usually
also another setting too.
Mm-hmm. Let's set that back to 1 and set this to ribbon. Now, ribbon will connect each particle with the trail based on how they're emitted, and this can give you some very interesting effects like this if they're just emitted randomly. Now, if you have the system moving in line, then it will leave a neat trail like that. Whereas if you have it something random like this, then it looks almost like lightning, actually. Okay.
The colors also make it look like lightning as well.
Yeah. Although, fun fact, lightning is purple, or blue, or pink. It's lots of colors. But I digress. So let's keep it on ribbon, that's neat. Ribbon count, similarly with, of course, this only works when your particle trail is set to ribbon, allows you to adjust, I believe, how many ribbons there are. So now you can see there's 2 separate ribbons. Set it to 4, there's 4 separate ribbons. Of course, 1 means they're all connected linearly with 1 ribbon. So that's another setting you can choose for ribbons in specific. And underneath this is the trail minimum vertex distance, which this is one I haven't really touched. I believe this is how far the particles can be from each other to make a trail.
For a ribbon, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have a few checkboxes here underneath here, which will adjust how the trail renders. Let's set this back to per particle, I believe. So trail world space keeps the trails in world space, even if the particles themselves are in local space. I believe. Let's give this a shot. Let's set this back to use local.
Whoa.
That was interesting. And let's move it around. You'll see the particles move with it, but the trails do not.
Okay, I have some ideas already of what I can use
Yeah,
that. I
that's
haven't
kind
really
of
thought of using.
interesting. More you know.
Oh,
Let's set this back to global for now. Okay.
I see. It must be updating. That's why it's doing that.
Mm-hmm. Now, also, contrarily, if you uncheck trail world space and you move it, and it's set to, say, use local, then the trails move with it, as you can see. It's kind of neat. Oh, I'm getting ideas myself. So what we have here is the trail dies with the particle. That means when the particle ends its lifetime, the trail disappears with it. If we uncheck that, and well, I think in the case of ribbon, then the trail will persist. But it's something. This is a checkbox I haven't really touched very much, but it's.
I think if you wanted the trail to die before the particle does, I think that's what it's for.
Mm-hmm. And the next one we have is the particle size affects the trail width. So if we uncheck this, then the trails are, they're really big. But if we check it, then the trails are scaled according to the size of the particle, which we choose up here in the min and max start size. To demonstrate, if I set this to a bigger number, then you'll see the trails for that specific particle get really big because they scale according to the particle. If you want to control it separately instead, using the settings down here for the trails, you'd uncheck that. Underneath this, we have particle size affects trail lifetime. So the size of the particle will determine its lifetime here based on, I believe, min and max. Oh, Andrew mentions, whenever I select anything, the gizmo is massive. So next, move close to us, if you would, so that the gizmos aren't huge. Thank you.
I just realized these do have trails on them, just really small.
Oh.
So it might be because of the particle size. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Oh, it's because it's determining the length of the trail based on the particle size because the particles are really small. If we were to, I believe, increase the particle size, say to here, the trails last a little bit longer. But I'm sure that can be adjusted. Let's set that back to where it was. Now we have inherent color trail from particle. That is checked, and as you can see, the trail is the same color as the particle that it follows. If we uncheck that, then you can color the trails independently using these settings beneath it. Now, let's leave that unchecked because I do think we want separate trail colors. Now, trail texture mode, there's a few settings here. Right now, it's set to stretch. And to really demonstrate this, I'm going to set this to ribbon. You'll see how the particle, the texture that we have, which is this one, this is stretched across the whole length of the trail. If instead we choose tile, let's set this to per particle, you'll see it, well, these aren't too long, but we can always go up and adjust the length, but you can see it doesn't stretch across them, it tiles. And to better demonstrate this, I believe our next one, which is distribute. Actually, I think it's repeat. Well, there's a bunch of different options here which allow you to change how the trail texture is applied. Let me set this back to ribbon so we can see these differences. Stretch is useful if you want it to, say, if you have a smooth gradient and you want that smooth gradient to follow behind, a moving object, it fades out as it goes along. That's where stretch is useful. Tile, this is a great example of tile, actually. This is a texture that is tiled along the length of the trail, I believe. Am I correct?
Yes, it's actually a trail texture. You don't actually see the particle itself. You just only see the trail.
Now, many of these settings, I definitely encourage folks who want to mess with particles to go in and mess with these settings yourself. It can definitely help giving you a more intuitive sense of how these things work. Now, we have minimum and maximum trail lifetime. So if we set this back to per particle, right now the trail lasts as long as the particle. But if we decrease this, then you'll see some trails end early. And you'll notice when the trail ends, if the particle's still alive, it starts a new one. I could see this being useful for certain things. But this, even if you don't need it, the options are here, and I definitely encourage experimentation. Now, since we have unchecked inherit trail color from particle here, the particle trails are controlled using the min and max trail color here. So let's pick some colors here. How about green and pink? Now the particle trails are colored separately using these two colors, and the particles themselves are using these two colors. Similarly, we can also control the minimum and maximum trail width, and since we have the particle trail being controlled by the particle itself, the particle size itself, using this checkbox, then this is based on the size of the particle. So if I set this to, say, 0.2, then regardless of the size of the particle, the trails are going to be much smaller than them. This is actually what I used over here on these sparks. The spark particles are a good deal, it's really hard to see here, but the sparks themselves are a little bit larger than the trails. But the trails themselves are very thin to give it that kind of trailing effect.
I
found Nax.
Oh, hello.
We have a visitor. Okay. So let's set trail width back to 1 for both of these. Now, how we have over with the sparks is you can generate a light for each of these particles, and that's what this checkbox allows you to do. If you have a light object, it will duplicate that for each of the particles, and you can even control how many of the particles have a light and such.
I'm going to make a child object underneath it.
You go ahead, Aegis.
And drag this out. Oh, actually, you know what? To kind of slow down here a little bit. So I select the object, for example, and I hit the child object, the star button, to create an object underneath it. I'm going to actually hold the grab button on this and press trigger to bring out a new window and rename this to light template. There we go. And in order to create a light, you can go to attach components, rendering, and light. Now I'm going to play around with the settings a little bit. Make it like a red.
Okay.
And decrease the range. There we go.
So we have
ourselves
a light here.
Yep.
And now, I believe we take the light itself. Yes.
Yep.
So we take the
And I
light
can
itself,
just-
and when we turn this on, now each particle has its own little red light. You might have to turn up the range. Yeah, look at
working?
that. Yes, it's really difficult to see, but if you see on
Let
my
me
wing
increase
here,
its,
there we go. Each particle, actually, that's interesting. And I just learned something new there myself. So even though this light has a color attached to it, the particle system is changing the color based on the color of the particle itself. So you can see when these particles are yellow, it's got a yellow light, and when they're blue, they're blue. And of course, if we decrease the lights ratio, then only a few of these particles are going to have lights attached, which can be helpful if you need performance. However, rendering many lights is pretty cheap, so it's not something you have to worry too much about.
especially with smaller ranges.
And especially if you have shadows disabled on the lights. Now, to control these lights, you have a few options beneath here. You can use light random distribution, lights use particles color, size affects the light range, and alpha affects light intensity. Now, you'll notice how, as we see here, the particles are colored based on the particle, or the light is colored based on the particles themselves. Well, there's a checkbox to disable that if you don't want that, and then it will use the color we define on the light as we defined it over there. This is a very weird particle system. I'm gonna check that because that looks pretty good. Okay. So let's use random distribution. I believe that sets them out randomly. I'm not entirely sure. And the size. Ooh, that's bright. Okay. So this is where we have size affects light range, and that is the particle size. The particles are really little, so it affects the light range there. But instead, if we want to use the light range that we define here, we would uncheck that. And we have this set to 10 meters, and we're rendering a lot of lights, so therefore, bright. Similarly, we have a range multiplier here if you want the lights to shine a little bit more brightly than the particles, if you're using their size.
You can even see it on the inspector now.
Oh yeah. If we set that to like 4, it gets nice and bright. Similarly, we have a light intensity multiplier. If you want the range to be based on the particle size, but you want the intensity to be a bit brighter, like so. Or darker, either way. And you can also define the maximum number of lights, in this case 20. So regardless of how many particles there are, you'll only be rendering 20 lights from X number of particles that actually have them. So now we have it set to 4, so at most, You'll see 4
There are
lights
only
here.
4 lights.
No! Brian would be proud. Now, beneath this is for a sprite sheet, where you can set up animation tiles and such. So, to get prepared for a sprite sheet, I'm going to get rid of ribbons and particle trails, and I'm going to set our particle size a little bit larger, and oh boy, lights. Let's disable those. That didn't disable those. Let's set the ratio to 0. Okay. So, what kind of a sprite sheet do we have?
Alright, let's go to here. Particles. Particle sprites. And let's find something interesting.
We could use the smoke that we have over here. That might be kind of nice. Ooh. This is an interesting one. This is kind of a hexagonal grid. Now, this is a sprite sheet texture, and to use this with your trail, or with your particles, if we just take this as is, and we apply it to the particle, actually this one would be a much better demonstration since it's much brighter. If we apply this as is to the particle, that's weird. That's not how we want this to look at all. We want it to animate. We want to start here and animate it as we go down. Well, to do that, we need to know how many tiles or images are on this segment. So in this case, we have 4 by 4. So on the animation tiles, if we put 4 by 4 animates, that's kind of neat. Now you'll notice, of course, since we have the particles having random speeds, random size, the particle still reflects that. And as you'll notice, if the particle has a shorter lifetime, it animates more quickly because it's animating throughout this whole sequence in a shorter amount of time. Consequently, if you have the lifetime of the particles quite high, it animates more slowly. Now, here you can also choose, we have an animation cycles input, which if we set this to 2, it goes through, what it does is it animates through the whole sequence, and since it's 2, it does it again. And it will do this, it will cycle through however many times you have set here. So if I set it to 6, then it's just little explosions all over the place all of the time. If you set this to 0, it just shows you the very first frame and does absolutely nothing.
Let's try this one again.
Ooh. That's really cool, actually. I like
was just curious on how that would look.
Okay. So this particle was a little dark, but we just increased the tint color from, even though it's, maximum white, this slider down here, for those who don't know, is called the gain slider, and that will bring the color above 1. And you can really make things nice and bright using this slider. Let's keep it like that, because that's really pretty. Okay. Underneath this, we have the animation type, and this is set to whole sheet. So it is animating through the whole sheet of the particle. Now, say you want the particle system to have, say you have, instead of having 4 different sheets for 4 different particle systems, you can just have all of the animations of one thing on one row. Just a single row, have a bunch of different rows, and you can have a bunch of different icons animating separately for each particle in one system, which there are some sheets that allow you to do that. But in this case, these are designed to let you go through the whole sheet, so having this set to whole sheet is what works best in this case. Slowly, taking a step back, if you go to single row, use row index, and use random row, apply to this. A row index will let you pick what row you want to use, and if you have use random row checked, then it will pick a random one. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, about using multiple rows for different particles. Say if we have one type of particle going on one row and another on another row, you can have like, quite a few different types of particles to randomly like pop up and be animated individually.
Griffin says, animated GIF particles. I am surprised no one has done that yet.
It's possible.
Underneath this, we have some common transition templates, and these exist mainly, I believe, because we don't have access yet to alpha over lifetime. So this allows you to have the particle fade in, fade out, or both. If I set this to both, and we need a... Well, let me actually use what we have here. Plug this in. Ooh, that's very bright. Let's reduce that. And we turn on alpha fade in and fade out. And we set these cycles to 0. You'll see, even though it's not animating, the particle doesn't just blip in and blip out of existence. It kind of fades in and fades out nicely. This is good for if you aren't using a sprite sheet that doesn't fade in and fade out on its own. This is great for just a static particle like what we have here. Of course, you can set it to do fade in only, so it will pop out, but it will fade in. Same with fade out. They'll pop in, but fade out. Now we have these also for intensity. So this fades not the alpha, but the color from black and to black, I believe. Since we have this set to additive, though, they are identical. Let's keep on alpha fade in and fade out, and set this to back to 1. And this really goes over all of the settings and the particle style, but there is another component that is required for this, and that is the emitter. It has a few settings, specifically for the sphere emitter. Now, all of the emitters have a rate, which controls how many particles are emitted from that emitter per second. If I set this to 1, then only 1 particle comes out per second. If I set it to 100, that's a lot of particles. But it doesn't it is quite bright. It doesn't overload the system, because if we scroll up, the max particles is set to 1,000, so you will never see more than 1,000 particles on your screen. Let's set this back to 10. Now, something that's useful if you want to have a particle activate and deactivate at a certain time is burst. So if I set the rate here to 0, and I set the burst on activated, say, to 40, and we set both the min and max to 40, and we disable the particle and re-enable it, you see a burst of 40 particles. This is great for like an explosion or something. Or this is what is used on the weapons. Yeah, as you can see, when Aegis shoots, he just enables and disables the particle system, which causes the particles to fire out. You can also choose here, let's revert our emitter back to default. We can... I see, thank you. Our radius here will let you choose the radius of this, for example, so you can now they're emitting from a larger area. You can also choose to emit it from a shell, and you'll see it only emits from the outside of this half-meter sized sphere, but not in the middle. And this applies for, I believe, most of the emitters as well. You can also choose things like a random direction, which will have the velocities of the particles be in a random direction, or you can enable force direction, and you can push the particles in a certain direction. If I set this to X, you'll see they go that way. This is useful for like a steam plume, for example. I believe this is. One thing I should note is particle... So, how do I word this? There is one particle system, and the particle system has a particle style. However, a particle system can emit from multiple emitters. And say you have 2 emitters that are going at a rate of 10, they can both use the same particle system, and they use the same particle style. So you can have one system control multiple emitters. So say you have a bunch of emitters for, say, smoke on a pipe, then they will all emit using that one system, and you only have to change one particle system, not like 10. So we have a box emitter here, for example. Thank you. If we take our particle system and plug it into that emitter, you'll see these particles are emitting from both the sphere emitter we have here with its settings and the box emitter that we have here with its settings using the same system. It's great so that you don't have to duplicate so many different particle systems, and you can very nicely change everything all at once, even if they're using different... Wow, that just went synthwave. Oh, and excellent colors.
So, okay, you know what? I gotta have it like that.
Me colors.
So let's add that.
Very nice. Okay. But in general,
yes.
In general, this goes over the basics of all of the settings I think you will need to know when it comes to particles. What you do with them and how you manipulate the particles is, of course, ultimately up to you. And particles are incredibly fun to work with if you know what you're doing. And, even if you don't, you can sometimes, like what we did here, you can make some really interesting stuff. But, yes, I believe that is it. And we are coming up on time. Oh, thank you for listening to my big speech on particles.
Yes.
Well, shall we head back to the desk and look if there's any questions? I don't think we had many questions this time.
There's been a few.
Macron.
Good job, you guys. Very good job.
I see a question here. Can you make the point cluster mesh follow a path? I don't think we support that just yet, unfortunately. But the point cluster mesh does have quite a few options associated with it, and it would be good to research into. Yeah.
Is the camera on me, or is that someone else's?
No, that camera is on you. Yeah, Next needs to put it back on the anchor now.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
So Angel Boy VR asks, how much does it affect performance in comparison to points light that you just spawned via the dev tip? So a point light used with a particle system is exactly the same performance impact as a light that you use any other time. It's a light. Just make sure you don't have shadows on it, because the shadows are what takes up performance.
Oh god, my no-clip speed is super fast because I had it like cranked all the way up from when I was small.
Let's see. Can you also rotate the particles around its axis within the animation? Oops. If you want a particle to rotate like that with its animation, I believe it will have to be baked into the animation sheet that you're using. You can, of course, use the min and max rotation values, but if you set them to the same value, then it will rotate them a certain amount. I believe that might mostly answer that question. But, yeah. Where's Next? Oh, there you are.
I was going to say, he's there. He's just laying around as usual.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm having to keep him mute because puppy's barking like crazy.
Oh.
Next is doing the whole paint me like one of your French girls thing at the moment.
Oh my goodness.
Next laying around on the job, yeah. Can't get the staff these days.
Wow.
There's my chat. There we go.
I keep getting Aegis wings in my face.
I think that's pretty good on. I think that's good for our questions here. That was a lot of information going over everything with particles, and very appreciative for that, RayUV and Aegis. I think that's going to offer a lot for the community to be able to now build out some really amazing different particle effects, and just the stuff that you guys created on the stream alone was incredible to see. It was really awesome.
Indeed.
Oh,
I'm
yeah,
real excited to see what the community can do.
And I know we are planning as well with the workshops. Some of them will be like 1 or 2 parts as well. So some workshops may actually continue on from a previous workshop.
Oh yeah, I'm sure there's even
complex
more
the
that we could
subject
go
is.
on from
Yeah.
particles too, and we'll have another session for particles, I'm sure.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
definitely. This video will be on our YouTube channel by next week. So it'll be added to our Workshop Wednesdays playlist, and you can find it on there. So you do have, a good way of, going back to everything. We're also going to finally get around to doing something that we need to do, and that's updating this world so that people can come into it and find the stuff, because we haven't actually been able to do it. So, we've been quite busy.
Mm-hmm.
So, And then, what have we got going on Friday next?
Friday is going to be I was thinking it was going to be Games and Neos, but now I'm thinking, considering that Valentine's Day is coming up, we might do like a Valentine's Day special. So I think that would be pretty fun. Maybe just have some like Valentine's Day stuff and give Valentine's out. What do you guys think? Do you think we should do Valentine's Day stream, or should we do Games of Neos? Well, as Wraith farts, as they flash away.
I don't do Valentine's Day.
Singles Awareness Day stream. Got you. We'll do that too. Don't worry. This that's what we'll do it for too as well. I promise. We'll do for all those singles out there as well.
No,
But-
I've gone through divorce. That's good enough for me.
Oh well, yeah.
More.
Sharing love is good though. Yeah, I mean, Valentine's Day isn't about just a relationship. It's about love, and I think that no matter
Yes.
what, you can have love.
Sharing good.
Yes,
Friends and family.
and yes, Wraith needs more hugs.
Yes.
Oh.
Wraith needs hugs.
Yeah.
No, my personal space.
Okay, everyone. Well, thank you so much again for watching this stream. If you haven't already, please join our Discord, discord.gg/neosvr. And please join us on Friday for our 3 p.m. PST streams, and we will be signing off here. Thank you again so much for watching, and hopefully you make some amazing particles out there.
Just remember as well, we will be opening the world up for an hour after the stream's finished as usual, so you can come speak to us, ask us questions and everything. Just look for the Workshop Wednesdays world in your active sessions, and it'll be Workshop Wednesdays public you'll be looking for.
Absolutely. Okay, see you later, you guys. Bye.
See you Friday.